Just try to picture it. A routine afternoon flight, minutes after leaving Ahmedabad, and then the unthinkable. June 12th, 2025, the world just stopped as news started breaking about this terrible aviation disaster in India.
Yeah, Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner.
Exactly. It took off from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, headed for London Gatwick, but very shortly after takeoff, it just plummeted.
Crashed right into a doctor's hostel next to BJ Medical College, and there was that Mayday call just before they lost contact.
Right. So today, our mission really is to get past those initial headlines. We want to carefully unpack everything we can find, the detailed reports, news bits, the human stories, which are just heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's a lot to sift through.
We're looking at detailed reports, news excerpts, personal accounts, trying to pull out the really key pieces of information, the insights, basically give you a shortcut to really understanding what happened.
It's a complex picture.
So this deep dive is going to walk you through the facts as we know them, the staggering human cost, the huge response effort, and of course the ongoing search for answers. We'll try to do it respectfully, obviously, but also informatively.
And that detail you mentioned about takeoff and the rapid descent, that's key, isn't it? It took off around 1:38 p.m. local time, IST, and within, 5 minutes?
Just 5 minutes, yeah. It started that incredibly fast, uncontrolled descent.
Uncontrolled is the word. Just terrifying.
You brought up the Mayday call.
Yeah.
That it was issued just before contact was lost.
Yeah.
What does that detail alone suggest to investigators? Does it tell us anything about, say, the pilot's awareness or the kind of emergency they faced? Does it narrow things down at all?
Well, that Mayday call right at the end is crucial. It tells us the flight crew knew they were in a critical, life-threatening situation. They were trying to communicate it.
So not something completely instantaneous, maybe, but incredibly sudden.
Exactly. It suggests a sudden, probably catastrophic event that gave them very, very little time to figure it out or fix it. It's a vital clue about the absolute final moments, the last known state of the aircraft and the crew.
And then, as you said, it hit the hostel, turned what was probably a busy area into just, a scene of utter devastation.
Unimaginable devastation.
The numbers are just stark, aren't they? 242 people on board, 230 passengers, 12 crew, and 241 of them died.
Almost everyone.
But it's when you start looking into the reports, the individual stories, that's when the sheer scale of the human loss really hits home.
And it wasn't just on the plane. The crash also killed people on the ground.
That's right. Reports vary slightly, but somewhere between 39 and 61 people on the ground, including medical students in that hostel. Some reports even mention an additional 30 ground fatalities later, plus around 50 injured students.
So many lives affected. What details really stand out for you when you think about that loss?
I think what's truly harrowing is the story of the sole survivor, a British national, Viswash Kumar Ramesh. Just one survivor out of 242.
One. He was apparently in seat 11A near an emergency exit, suffered relatively minor physical injuries, managed to get out through a broken window. But the reports mention he's struggling profoundly with survivor's guilt.
Oh, absolutely. How could you not?
Especially having watched his own brother die on the flight, to be the only one carrying that unimaginable weight. I think that single story, maybe more than any statistic, captures the true gravity of this tragedy. It just highlights the immense human suffering.
And the scene right after the crash must have been absolute chaos. It needed this huge, coordinated response. We're talking, 150 personnel from the Central Reserve Police Force, the CRPF?
Yes, and 3 teams from the National Disaster Response Force, the NDRF.
Plus Indian Army troops. The numbers vary a bit in reports, 130 to 300 maybe. And then 300 local firefighters.
Ambulances, civil defense units, the Central Industrial Security Force, CISF, Border Security Force, BSF, even Western Railways sent their disaster teams.
It really was an all-hands-on-deck situation, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation bringing in heavy machinery just to clear the debris, that alone paints a picture of the level of destruction. Nearby hospitals were just swamped immediately with burn victims, trauma patients.
And then the authorities in Gujarat having to set up DNA sample centers.
Yeah.
That really underscores how difficult the identification process was going to be, given the state of the crash site.
Painstaking is the word for that identification process, relying heavily on DNA, dental records, because of the severity. By June 17th, so 5 days later, they'd managed to hand over the remains of 83 passengers to their families.
Only 83 by then.
Yeah, and they had about 125 DNA matches confirmed. But still a long, long way to go. It's a grim, slow process.
And it's in that process, isn't it, that the names start to emerge from the numbers. Like Irfan Shaikh, a young crew member, 22, from Pune.
Yeah.
His body was identified through DNA and sent home.
Yes, and the Indian filmmaker Mahesh Kalawadia, also known as Jariwala, only 34, he was another confirmed fatality, also identified via DNA. Each identification is, well, it's a step towards some kind of closure for a family, but it just reminds you of all the individual lives lost.
So this obviously leads to the big question, why? Why did this happen? The investigations are absolutely critical here. You mentioned the black boxes.
Right, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, both were recovered, thankfully. It took about 28 hours after the crash.
And they're now being analyzed by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB.
Yes, but what's really striking is how international this investigation is. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they're heavily involved. UK authorities, too.
Plus the manufacturers.
Absolutely. Boeing, who made the aircraft, and GE, who made the engines, they're assisting the AIIB with the analysis. This kind of international collaboration, it's not just about sharing resources, it really highlights how interconnected global aviation safety is.
That's a really good point. One incident in one country can trigger reviews and changes worldwide. It affects basically every flight everyone takes.
Exactly. Standards get reevaluated, designs might be questioned, operational procedures. It has ripple effects.
And the fact you mentioned earlier that this is the first fatal hull loss of a Boeing 787 since it started flying back in 2009, that just puts this investigation under an even more intense spotlight, doesn't it? What does that specifically mean for Boeing and maybe for aviation safety standards overall?
Oh, that fact is huge. It's seismic, really. It means this isn't just an Air India issue. It's guaranteed to trigger an unprecedented level of scrutiny on Boeing's design, its manufacturing, its certification processes for the 787.
A plane with a near-perfect safety record until now in terms of fatal crashes.
Precisely. So this challenges that record directly. If they find systemic issues, and that's a big if at this stage, it could lead to industry-wide changes for this aircraft type or even wider operational protocols, they'll be looking at everything.
What kind of potential causes are on the table at this point?
Well, the initial speculation covers a range. Things like engine failure, maybe a bird strike during that critical takeoff phase, but also more technical possibilities like flaps misconfiguration.
That's about the wing settings for takeoff.
Exactly. If the flaps aren't set correctly, the plane might not generate enough lift. Then there's talk of heat lift problems, which could be relevant given the time of year and location. High temperatures can sometimes affect engine performance, and of course, you can never rule out pilot error until the data is fully analyzed.
There's a wide range of possibilities. And the aftermath within Air India itself seems to have been quite swift, hinting at maybe wider issues. Even though the investigation is ongoing, 3 executives were sacked.
That's right, though reports said it was for unrelated systemic failures. Still, the timing suggests perhaps a pre-existing environment of challenges within the airline that's now under a harsher light.
And support for the victims has started, right? Interim compensation, counseling.
Yes, interim payments of 25 lakh per victim were announced fairly quickly, along with survivor support, including trauma counseling, which is obviously vital.
That broader context, the airline's health, is probably why the Tata Group, who own Air India now, stepped in so strongly, isn't it?
Absolutely. They immediately declared a substantial payout 1 crore to each affected family, plus arranging medical help, promising to rebuild damaged structures on the ground. It shows they understand the need for a significant response.
And the public reaction has been huge, too. Bollywood figures canceling events, political leaders calling for safety reviews.
Yes, people like Salman Khan, Akshay Kumar canceling things out of respect, and political leaders demanding thorough reviews. It really shows how deeply this crash has affected the national mood in India.
Beyond all the technical details and official responses, there are those human stories, the echoes of grief that just stick with you. You mentioned the survivor, Viswash Kumar Ramesh, watching his brother perish. The guilt.
It's almost unimaginable. And then there are others, like the businessman Soren Palkuwala, who lost his only daughter, Sanjana. He talked about the grief feeling like losing loved ones 37 years ago, just this raw, recurring pain.
Such profound loss.
But then you also hear these stories of near misses. Dr. Umang Patel, who apparently changed his travel plans last minute because of family advice, a small decision that saved his life. These individual accounts, they just remind you that behind every number is a person, a family, a whole community changed forever. For you listening, these aren't just names, they're like a window into how far the ripples of a disaster like this can spread.
And this tragedy It really does shine a light on potential vulnerabilities, doesn't it? Things that go beyond just this one flight. It raises serious questions about systemic lapses, maybe not just at Air India, but it also casts a shadow on Boeing's record, especially with the 787's previously clean slate.
Definitely. And you see the highest levels of government paying close attention. Prime Minister Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah are reportedly monitoring the investigation closely. That tells you how significant this is nationally.
And political figures pushing for broader change.
Yes, people like Maharashtra's Ajit Pawar emphasizing the urgent need to review safety protocols across all airlines. It's a push for systemic improvement, recognizing this isn't just about one aircraft, but the whole aviation system.
So looking ahead, what are the next steps for the Air India Flight 171 investigation?
Well, the formal investigation is very much ongoing. It involves all those players we mentioned, the AIB, NTSB, Boeing, GE, India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, UK aviation authorities. It's designed to be thorough, painstaking work. The goal is always to prevent something similar from ever happening again.
And part of that process will likely involve looking closely at Air India's own procedures.
Oh, undoubtedly. There will likely be a rigorous review of aircraft maintenance logs, pilot scheduling, training protocols, especially across their entire 787 fleet. And the key really will be the analysis of those black boxes.
The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder.
Exactly. What they reveal is expected to be absolutely pivotal in trying to pinpoint the root cause or likely causes of the crash. Alongside that, of course, the efforts for compensation and final victim identification continue, and the whole industry will be watching, reflecting on 787's safety.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Air India 171 crash, it really hammers home just how significant this event is. India's deadliest air disaster in decades. And crucially, that first fatal hull loss for the Boeing 787 since it was introduced.
Yeah, we've touched on the huge scale of the loss, both on the plane, on the ground, the incredible rescue and recovery effort that kicked in immediately.
And the complexity of what comes after the identification process, the multi-layered international investigation, and how it's put both Air India and Boeing under intense scrutiny regarding systemic issues and safety.
And we have to remember the human dimension through it all. Beyond the reports and the technical analysis, there are just countless stories of personal tragedy, grief, resilience, survivor's guilt, the ongoing struggle for answers, and some form of justice.
The formal investigation carries on, obviously. The analysis of those black boxes is key. And there's still that focus on compensation, identifying all the victims, and this wider industry look at the 787 safety, maintenance, and how pilots are scheduled.
So thinking about everything we've covered, what does this deep dive really compel us to think about? Perhaps about that constant push for aviation safety in a world where technology keeps changing so fast.
Yeah, how do we strike that right balance between technological advances and the absolute need for human oversight, for strong systems, for integrity?
And ultimately, for you listening, what stands out the most from all this? What questions does this tragedy leave you with about that complex mix of technology, potential human error, and responsibility when things go wrong in the skies?